Welcome everyone for coming. Thank you for attending. This is going to be one of our biggest online events we've ever hosted. So thank you for being a part of it. My name's Mark. I'm the head wine buyer for United Cellars, and I'll be your host for this evening. However, I'll have my my assistant here to give me a hand. Luke, say good day, Luke.
Hello. Evening.
Luke's going to be kind of helping us in the background here to make the magic happen. We've also got, from the other side of the world, we've got Alistair Cooper, who's a master of wine and a companion of ours at United Cellars.
Hello, everyone. I'm recognizing lots of these names now from the past couple of months, so good to see you all again.
Excellent. Hello, Ali. And then, of course, we've got Peter Fraser, head winemaker of Yangarra Estate, who's going to be, thankfully for me, he's going to be saying the majority of the of the sentences this evening. So we're going to be talking about his lovely wines. Obviously, Yangarra, they've built a reputation in Australia for fantastic wines, based in, of course, the McLaren Vale in South Australia. And of course, they make a huge stable of wines. Tonight, we're just tasting 3 wines, but I think it's a very fantastic cross-section of Peter's array of wines. And I think it also shows a lot of the key compartments of what makes Yangarra so special. So very keen to get into it. So welcome everyone. I'm just going to go to our next page here, and Luke's got a couple of things to say about our next page here.
Yeah, brilliant. So welcome everybody again to Echo Mark. Great to see so many familiar faces as well as a few new ones. So welcome. If you're not too familiar with the online tasting formats that we run here, a couple of bits to just mention. Firstly, questions and comments we really encourage. We want it to be as interactive and engaging as possible. So for that reason, feel free to unmute anytime you'd like and ask a question. If you don't feel too comfortable doing that, feel free to use the comment box in the corner there. Put a question to me, and I can kind of voice it towards Mark, Ali, or Peter. So also, as you can see on the screen, we are running the famous Wheel of Wine competition. So the idea is you text your favorite wine with the 3 codes there with your name and your email address. You'll get a confirmation, and then at the end of the night, we'll spin the Wheel of Wine. And it's your chance to win your fave. So that's a bit of excitement there. Just to mention, we are live streaming on Facebook. So if you have any friends or family that might be interested, feel free to send them the link. The more the merrier. My colleague Jane is monitoring the Facebook chat. So if there's any comments coming off Facebook, Jane will put them towards us and we can get them answered. But yeah, great to have everybody on, and really looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, Luke. And just hopefully everyone's got all of their wines there in front of them. I would strongly encourage you to pour all 3 if you can. We sent you a placemat. If you've had the chance to print that out, fantastic. If not, that's not a problem. We're going to be trying the 2 Shirazes first, the 2018 Estate Shiraz. The second one we'd be trying is the Kingswood Shiraz, and the final wine is the Old Vine Grenache. So I encourage you to have all 3 wines in front of you. You can go back and forth between these wines in this way. However, if you've only got 1 glass to go around, then please do start with the 2018 Estate Shiraz. So I'm going to, I think that's the introduction. I think we're going to head across to, I'm going to hand the mic over to Mr. Peter Fraser, who is going to be giving us a bit of a rundown of who he is and why Yangarra is so special in the Australian wine landscape.
All right, so I'll kind of start off with just a little summary of Yangarra. All the wines are estate grown, so we don't buy any fruit. And McLaren Vale called Blewett Springs, which is kind of the slightly higher kind of elevation part of McLaren Vale. It's slightly cooler, and it's probably most renowned for the sands, white sands, that's kind of really looks a bit like a beach. It's kind of quite, it's basically 100% silica. It's not a marine deposit. It's weathered sandstone. And those moments, a red ironstone rock, the North Maslin Sands, that makes it very special and unique. The vineyard's been farmed organically and biodynamically since 2008 and was certified in 2012.
We lost you
no,
there,
I'm
Katie?
me.
No, you can do it, just leave it, yeah.
So all good?
You just cut out for about 10 seconds there, mate. Sorry to say.
Okay, hopefully it won't keep happening. So the estate is a very special place. It's about 95 hectares and is predominantly, well, 100% to Southern Rhone grape varieties.
Fantastic. We might just go to a, I'm just going to show you a little map here so we can get a picture of where we are in the greater scheme of things. You'll see this is just that this is the main map of the major South Australian wine regions. And just down, you'll see here, this centre red part here is the McLaren Vale. Obviously in the centre, this white area is Adelaide proper, is the city of Adelaide, obviously. So surrounding that, sorry, gone too far. So the Clare Valley is up here. You've got the Barossa just here with the Eden Valley just to the east of that. Then you've got the Adelaide Hills, which kind of wraps around the outside. And then the McLaren Vale, which abuts the border of the McLaren Vale. So where these guys are, I'm going to hand over my screen to Luke now, and we're actually going to do a bit of an interactive map to go to exactly where the vineyard is.
Yeah, fantastic. So obviously we've got a overview of McLaren Vale and kind of South Australia in more broad detail there. I'm just going to zoom in to the winery itself.
So you can see Adelaide up to the north, see the flatter section of Adelaide. The Adelaide Hills, you'll see at the top of the screen there. The Onkaparinga Ranges just up to kind of northeast. And so this is Yangarra.
Peter, perhaps you'd like to take it from there. Feel free to kind of move me around.
You there, mate?
I can't see the screen for some reason.
Okay, we've just got a map of your estate that we're looking at right now.
Yeah. So, and I'm not sure whether it's got the various dots on it. Hard not being able to see it, but
Sorry, mate.
you can see there's probably 34 or so blocks on the estate. There's a whole series of different varieties that we've planted over the years. The main of the oldest vines is up on the kind of should be up on the kind of left, far left, which is the western side of the property, which are Grenache, 17 hectares of Grenache planted in 1946. And that probably represents nearly a fifth of the estate, and then would be probably around 45% of the estate is Shiraz, of which there's about 11 or 12 blocks of Shiraz. And then in the last probably 6 or 7 years, we've started planting a lot of the Southern Rhone varieties. We make 18 was the first vintage, a Grenache Blanc, Broussan, Claret, Picpoul and Bourboulon blend. We've also kind of started adding in our Grenache blend that we do called Noir, where we're adding, we've got Grenache Shiraz, Mourvedre, but we also use Cinsault, Counoir, and we've got Muscadin going in the ground this spring. So pretty exciting to some of the other varieties, but really the core of the plantings are Grenache and Shiraz, which is what we're looking at tonight.
Fantastic. So, Luke, if you wouldn't mind, if we go on to that next slide. This slide here. It's got such a fantastic representation here. We've got two slides that we're going to show side by side here, so well, consecutively after each other. So the first one is going almost exactly into what Peter was saying there. So you've got the winery. You'll see on the very right-hand side the buildings running along the road there. And then you've got the different layers of the soils here. And this image is taken directly off the Yangarra website. This is such a fantastic image. And then, Luke, would you mind going to the next, which is showing the grape variety? So you'll see here, stratified over the top of those layers of soil, you'll see where each of these grape varieties is grown. And I'll point to the bottom right of the screen there. You'll see an insanely large number of grape varieties, all from the Southern Rhone, that are grown within this one estate. So a lot of people, Pete, would call you a little bit of a maniac for having so many of these grape varieties grown here. But I know you guys have got such a passion for the Southern Rhone.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And for the most part, all of those varieties have worked really well. We've resisted the temptation to do any bottlings. We get a lot of questions, people asking us about whether we'd release certain varieties on their own. And often they're really interesting and delightful wines, but it becomes, we kind of have a philosophy that we don't want the amount of wines that we make to become too confusing. And it's quite exciting putting the blends together so that you're actually, piecing towards a collage, if you like, of the different characters that those wines bring. For example, the addition of the Cinsault and the Counoir and Carignan, I forgot to mention as well, that, really brings some lovely, pretty aromatics to the blend and different tannin profiles, etc. But, one of my I'll talk about Grenache probably in a lot more detail when we taste the Grenache last. But, I also really love seeing, I suppose, the core varietals on their own, unadulterated, really showing hopefully a sense of place. One of the things that we'd really try and do with our winemaking is, and it starts very much from the vineyard, putting the right practices in place in the vineyard to manage balanced yields, to get and I suppose the biological practices in the vineyard that really allows the vine to take from the mineral elements in the soil that really showcase a distinctiveness in the wines, but then to handle them in a certain way so that the wines are not over made, I suppose, in the fact that, they're not over oaked or they're not over extracted, and they can actually show.
I think we every time we go onto that screen, I think we're cutting you off a little bit there, Pete.
I think it might be taking a little bit too much bandwidth, so we'll just leave it as a still there.
We might just leave it as stills.
getting ahead of ourselves a little bit there.
It's a lovely 3D image we've got there, but I think it's cutting out the person talking. So yeah, fantastic. So thank you for that, mate. And
so could I, Mark? Sorry for butting in. I've got a quick question for Peter. You mentioned there your work in the vineyard allows you to essentially have potentially a more hands-off approach in the winery, and you're not looking to over-extract. I think in McLaren Vale, a lot of people acidify their wines. Where do you stand on acidification? Is it something you need to do or you don't do? And if not, why not?
It's interesting. We make another wine called PF Shiraz, which is a preservative-free Shiraz that also doesn't have any additions of any kind. And one could call it a natural wine, although I don't really necessarily like that term. I like to kind of call it a wine with minimal intervention.
Yeah.
And we started making that wine in 2013, and it taught us a lot about our winemaking and what we can achieve without interfering. We also, through our biodynamic practices and organic practices, that the important part with farming without chemicals is a bit like, I suppose I like to use the analogy of healthy living. If you are kind of looking after your body and doing generally the good things, you don't necessarily need the medicines, and the farm is a little bit like that, but it also makes you have to be aware of your vineyard, a bit like as if you are practicing good health to an extent, where you actually do practices that are preventative rather than reactive, which also enables you to see the effects of what you do, because you're probably good viticulture or grape growing and good non-interventional winemaking comes with a lot of people think, oh, well, you're hands off, you're not doing anything. You're actually probably doing 5 times the amount of observation that you might do if you are relying on just kind of reactively adding something. And with that, the next kind of part to that was we found we started by exposing. We do a lot of shoot thinning and a lot of leaf plucking. We actually probably expose our fruit a lot more than a lot of other wineries in a warmer region like McLaren Vale. And we find with that we get really good physiological ripeness quite early, and we also are able then to be able to pick a little bit earlier. And we also have some techniques in the winery where we're great, where we do a lot of berry sorting, de-stemming, so we're actually able to remove raisins and other bits and pieces. So we're really able to get a purer kind of extract from the grapes. And we also find, because you're not using synthetic fertilizers, which often have a lot of potassium, potassium is also kind of an enemy in really good winemaking, because potassium, as the grapes mature, exchanges with, I don't want to get into a chemistry lesson, but they exchange with hydrogen and they reduce the acidity in the wine, so which would then increase your need to acidify. In a really warm year, we might slightly acidify Shiraz to keep it microbiologically stable, but Grenache we never ever have to acidify, and it's very important, I think, that often some people might not notice, but there's a hardness to wines that are acidified. And when I say they're acidified with a fruit, a naturally occurring acid, and it's that natural acid that's in grapes that actually, I suppose, protects it from spoilage. So it's a very important part of winemaking, but the natural is best, and it gives a real fineness and structure to the wine.
Great, thank you. That's a brilliant answer. Thank you.
So a great question here we've got from who's written this here? Sorry, my screen is from Keith. So none of the wines that we have here tonight, here, Pete, are labelled natural or minimal intervention. And I know that you guys use minimal intervention, but you guys don't tend to kind of scream that to the rooftops, off the rooftops. So you, first of all, so 2 parts to the question: are you a fan of this concept of minimal intervention and saying it on your wines? And then second of all, this would be, I would imagine this would be a wild ferment wine. Is that correct?
It is. All our wines are predominantly indigenous yeast. So it's kind of, I take it down to quite basic level. When you look at a bunch of grapes, there's a white sheen on the berries, on the black purple berries. That white sheen is the natural yeast that live on the grapes, waiting for it to burst so they can do their job and procreate, if you like, and effectively their job is the decay of sugar in producing alcohol. So we've always had very good results. We've always had very good results with our wild yeast ferments. We find that they produce a little bit more glycerol, a little bit more complexity. In the very odd occasions when we've had inclement conditions, 2011, we've tended to inoculate more than we might have. So where possible, we always kind of tend to be back to basics. But we set ourselves up for success. If you pick with high sugars and produce high alcohol wines, it's very difficult to use native yeasts. And the second part of the question is that we don't really spruik about it because, to me, our wines are about a sense of place, about kind of I probably like to use the word sensitive winemaking. Moreover than minimal intervention, so that you're constantly thinking about how you can express the flavors of your site and the varieties, and also showcasing the best of the variety. A lot of the wines that I love to drink from around the world, they're renowned as being great vineyards and great winemakers, reliable winemakers. So for me, we want to concentrate on the great things that we do, not necessarily plastering kind of something that alienates people. And to me, it's about the place and it's about the varieties and showcasing them the best way we can. Fantastic.
Thanks for that question, Keith. Brilliant. Mark, I'm just going to throw back to you if that's okay.
Sure.
And perhaps we can start looking at the Kingswood.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we're going to be going from the 2018 Shiraz, which I think is a perfect introduction to the wines of Yangarra. Pete, if I'm not incorrect here, I believe this is your biggest production wine, the estate Shiraz.
Yeah, the estate Shiraz, and I did talk quite generally about the estate Shiraz. It is the wine that we produce the most of. It probably attracts some of the most attention. It's probably, along with the old vine Grenache, one of the best value wines that we make. It has a wonderful array, a minimal amount of new oak, but it gets some wonderful supportive puncheons and gets some maturation in foudre, 25 hectolitre foudre. We do a bit of whole bunch fermentation, which I think really adds to some of the fragrance and the tannin. And generally the reviews across the board from some of the key publications in Australia has kind of put this in, one of the best value Shirazes in the country. And something that I'm very proud of, that it walks a lovely line of wonderful concentration of fruit, but also freshness and brightness, and also somewhat kind of a lovely fine kind of tannin structure to it. So it's one of those wines that has a softness that's drinkable now, but also has great potential to age. And as I said, it basically takes up a lot of the different blocks across different soil types across the estate. And then as we go into the Kingswood, which is the next wine, is a single block wine, which we've selected, and I'll talk about in a bit more detail as to why and the different characters that it produces.
Absolutely. I must say this is a fantastic wine to hang your hat on, mate. Honestly, I think it was the 2016 vintage that got, I think it got 99 points from James Halliday. It was for a wine of this price point, which is an absolute steal, as you're alluding to. It was just, I think it was the cheapest 99-point wine I've ever seen in my life. It was incredible. So yeah, well done. So, and I hope all of our attendees this evening have enjoyed that one. And now we're going to move on to the second Shiraz of this evening, the King's Wood. This is a relatively new wine in the Yangarra stable. And Pete, would you mind just giving us a quick run through of what makes this wine so unique?
So the Kingswood wine is, you'll see the label on the front is a 25 hectolitre foudre. And this wine has probably started to be made in 2009. We made a wine. Some of you more familiar with the Yangarra might have seen the whole bunch, small pot whole bunch Shiraz that we used to make. And I traditionally kind of took that from a few different blocks. But when I was making that, there was a block that continued to kind of shine, and it was block 12, which on that little map, it's the only south-facing block of Shiraz, which in the southern hemisphere is the coldest aspect, that kind of gets the least amount of direct sunshine. And it always had a really bright red fruit and something really exciting of a fineness to the tannins, being that slightly cooler site. And in 2017, I started messing around with our first 25 hectolitre foudres, French foudres, and I really felt like this block would kind of really, meld itself with that kind of more reductive style of maturation. And the wine kind of nearly made itself and nearly made its label, and because it kind of told a story through the wine, it was very easy kind of label to create. And the 17 release, I think, sold out it won an award at a local retailer in Adelaide and sold very well and was selling well just on the wine quality, and then received some fabulous accolades. And on the back of the biggest one from Halliday, sold out the next day. And the 18 is heading kind of in the same direction. But yeah, this single block, like I said, it's very much about the red blue fruits. It's exclusively matured in the 25 hectolitre food. So they're kind of, just to imagine that, they're about probably 7 foot tall by about 7 foot wide.
And if I could just duck in, mate.
Interestingly,
there's if anyone wants to see an image of the foudre, it's on the bottle. Of course, you'll see it on the label there. Imagine that enormous barrel like that on its stocks at the bottom. Imagine that 7 foot tall. They're absolutely huge. Sorry for butting in.
I know. And many of the great Shirazes in the Rhone and the Rhone have been using foudres for a long time. Wines like Saint Henri, they were using larger vats, Penfolds, Saint Henri, and generally the Australian wines, and another great producer that uses them very well is Tyrrell's. Their vat series wines, and they kind of became out of favour in the kind of probably late 90s and the early 2000s. One, because many of them were quite old, and they kind of had and many of them had probably developed a spoilage yeast called Brettanomyces that were kind of giving them ill favour, and also there was an era in those 2000s where people wanted more oak and more concentration, and smaller oak gave you that greater concentration, but this large oak format really lends itself to a fineness and like I call it a reductive kind of maturation, meaning that because the wood is so thick, you don't get a lot of oxygen transfer across the oak, and so it slows down the maturation, and it also produces a little bit more savoury character because there isn't as much oxidation, bringing out, I suppose, the fruit characters. And it's something that we've moved towards a lot more larger format, whether it be puncheons for our other wines, which are 500 litre barrels. We just find that we get really tremendous results from the wine. And this wine's, I think, just really showcasing and really well. And one of the things that I look for in our wines is the power and the concentration of fruit that comes from the vineyard. But there's also hopefully an elegance and a fragrance and a finesse. And to me, exciting wines are the ones that balance those well. So that's always kind of our goal, showcasing the vineyard.
Peter, we've got a question come in from Danny. Thank you, Danny. The King's is showing really well, just straight out the bottle. When do you think it will be, at its best in terms of cellaring?
It's always a really interesting question. I think because the wine is still so unevolved, although it's still beautifully balanced in terms of the fineness of the tannins and the balance between the fruit and all that kind of coming together. I think it will generally have I would say at least 10 years. I think our wines look really good. And it really depends on how you like drinking your wines. I think our wines show really well at 8 to 10 years. If you have the patience and you get really wonderful rewards, because you start to get some of those lovely secondary characters, but you've still got some lovely primary fruits as well. And for those who want to be a little bit more patient, the X factor hopefully comes out at 20 years. But, that's always a bit of a guessing game. And depending on how well the wines are stored, etc. So, but it's my expectation that it could have a really good life. But I'd like to say for those, I think 8 to 10 years, our wines are in a really lovely sweet spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, I mean, it's obviously very difficult for Peter to be saying this being only the second release of this wine. But that said, I mean, I find this quite a beguiling wine in that fruit character is quite pronounced now. It's not hidden. You see in a lot of younger wines, they tend to hide the fruit, and it's just this thick, heavy tannin, and it's kind of brooding and quiet. And I don't get that at all from this wine. I think it's quite forward right now. But what I'm left with after the wine is gone is this sandy layer of tannin around the mouth, all around the mouth. And that to me that will kind of soften and become more silky and light and make the wine longer in general. So I think a lot of people would drink this now and say, this is just absolutely perfect, good to go, happy days, let's drink it, no worries. But I really, truly think this, I think this would go for a long time. This is an absolutely, beguiling wine.
Interesting, like I've been very fortunate, one at the Len Evans tutorial and at various other occasions to drink some very old Hunter Shirazes that were probably made in a similar fashion. And, they just amazingly fine in their tannins and balance, and they wouldn't have been the Barossa or McLaren Vale blockbuster, and they're just incredibly delightful as older wines. And so definitely, I think that concentration or power doesn't necessarily need to be kind of the measure of length. And Alistair probably would be of the worldly wines that he would get over there in the UK is that, hopefully I would like to think that there's a bit of inspiration that we get out of some of the wonderful wines out of the Northern Rhone, but with our own expression.
So it's really interesting you said that. Unfortunately, I'm gutted. I haven't got the wine here to try, but I was just about to ask you, Peter, which if you have estates over, in Northern Rhone that you really admire and look up to personally, and I would never say, would try and imitate, but is there a style that you prefer?
Look, some of the things I take out of inspiration, some of them are a bit unicorn. But a lot bunchier than mine. Ours are only 25% whole bunch. I absolutely adore René Rostang wines, and probably I would say they would be my number one kind of go-to for inspiration of great Shiraz from the Northern Rhone, and even in the slightly warmer areas, Alain Grayot, I think, makes incredibly value, bright, lovely, fine tannins. There's a few of the kind of ones that are really acclaimed that I find sometimes a little bit oaky, and I tend to steer away from them because they're just kind of, other people might love them, but they just, sometimes I just find them.
Keep going. Sorry, excuse me, sorry.
But yes. So yeah, and it's great. It's one of those really important things as a winemaker, is to taste that, and not necessarily to copy, but to gain inspiration. And I find that's, even not so much to the same varieties, but there's a producer in Prerat in South Africa that kind of have worked together in the past. He talks about time on skins and making wine a bit like tea versus extracting it like coffee, and just tasting those wines, hearing the rhetoric of how those winemakers are kind of working with what they do, are often things that'll give me ideas or inspiration to fine tune what we do.
Absolutely. Brilliant. That's fantastic. Yeah. It's great to see. I think that's such a valid point. Taking inspiration is never imitation. It's taking sort of inspiration, isn't it? And being able to take ideas and rework them and add them to your specific site.
Totally.
That was a very, very fantastic, thorough answer there, Pete. I appreciate that, mate. So,
got expensive tastes.
Yeah, well, I mean, one from a personal perspective here. I mean, I remember the small pot, which was the predecessor to this wine here, and I remember being a huge fan of it. And it really kind of fell over. It didn't really do much. It didn't get the acclaim that it deserved. And I'm just so glad that you guys were able to pick up and put it in as the Kingswood, and it's gained such accolades, and it's been so popular, and I'm just so glad that it's kind of gotten onto onto people's radars as it should. And as you were just saying it, I can't believe I couldn't picked it up before. This really does remind me of a few Hunter Valley Shirazes, of literally going back to the Tyrrell's wines, as you said. Those kind of, because it's not, despite someone's just said it's 14.5% alcohol. Would you pick that? Probably not. It's got an elegance and a finesse and a lightness to it that really does. It reminds me of those kind of what we would call in Australia a medium-bodied Shiraz. So it's just beautiful. So with that, I might put a full stop underneath that one, and then we're going to move ourselves on to one of my personal favorite grape varieties on this wide world, which is Grenache.
Mark, just before we jump into the Grenache, whilst everyone is pouring their glasses, Jane has been frantically messaging me saying there's been a lot of questions and comments coming off the Facebook thread. Jane, I'm just going to throw over to you, and perhaps you might be able to throw to Peter, Mark and Ali, if that's okay.
Thanks, Luke. So one more for Peter. You mentioned a passion for the Rhone varieties, and that's what you guys focus on. What sparked the passion of the Rhone varieties for you?
it's kind of a perfect question to lead into the Grenache.
Here it is.
Yeah, here is the passion for it. And it was pretty simple in the fact that our kind of, I suppose, the stalwart, the backbone of the estate is the 70-year-old bush vine Grenache. And I've been working with the vineyard since 1998. And over that time, every time we would have a visiting journalist from overseas, around the world, wine collectors from Australia, around the world, especially around the world, because I don't think necessarily in Australia it was appreciated how special Grenache that we had. And they would go back, and whether they were writers or people in the industry, their primary discussion was Grenache. And I started going to Rhone events. I used to go to there's an event called Hospice de Rhone in California every year, where producers from the Rhone would come to the US, Australian producers showcasing their Rhone varieties, and Californian producers showing their Rhone varieties. And I started tasting so many of these wines, and I really, felt that we could produce on that world stage and take it up to other producers around the world and produce something of incredibly high quality, that had its own unique expression. But and at that time in McLaren Vale, there was a lot of kind of, I would say, less suitable varieties planted in the region: Chardonnay, Merlot, Sauvignon Blancs, and really unsuitable to the variety, to the region. And I also, from just a purely an understanding point of view to consumers of the wines, was that you can't be great at everything. And you also, the great producers around the world are often very focused in what they make. And that we needed to back a winner, and we backed Grenache, and Grenache and Shiraz. And so when we started planting those other Rhone varieties, it was, well, let's look to varieties that grow really well where Grenache grows. We really didn't try and reinvent the wheel. And look, there's other really interesting wines coming out of McLaren Vale that are maybe Italian, whether it be Sangiovese or Fiano and Vermentino. But we just felt that we really wanted to focus on varieties that grew well where Grenache grew. And so that's kind of the short form of how we ended up so focused on these varieties.
Fantastic. Okay, so we might. I'm just finishing off an online question here for Keith. Keith was just asking a question about 14.5%, which I mentioned before. So, for you guys, I would say with Grenache, you would definitely be getting 14.5%. That's absolutely completely normal for Grenache around the world. Shiraz at 14.5%. That would be relatively normal for you in the McLaren Vale, I would say.
Yeah, our wines generally range between 14 to 14.5. It's kind of where they're right. In winemaking speak, we measure the sugar in Beaumay, which is kind of the amount of sugar that will produce the equivalent amount of alcohol. It's interesting with the wild yeast that we rely on. They tend to overproduce. They tend to produce a little more alcohol than they do the starting sugar. They're very efficient alcohol converters. So we generally pick at about 13.5 Beaumay and end up with about 14 to 14.5. And as we're kind of picking on flavour and acid, especially with Grenache. Grenache is the other part of the equation, that Grenache is actually has really low pH, which is a kind of form of measurement of the acidity. And if we were to pick it at much less than that, the acidity would be way too searing. So this wine has a pH of, and I won't bore you with the numbers, but it's much more of the acidity of a white wine. And that's kind of balancing those slightly higher alcohols. But these wines are generally in that range, and it's interesting. I think when alcohol becomes a problem is more when it gets above 15. And a lot of wines from around the world, especially in Europe, are poorly labelled. They can often be labelled at 13.5 when in actual fact, or 14.5, and they're actually 15. These are genuinely 14 and 14.5.
I think I've seen over the years, Burgundy producers say that the wine is 13.5% for about the last 15 years, to be honest. So, or 12.5%.
Correct.
They just don't want to change the label.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly.
So speaking of Burgundy, the grape variety that you've got in your glass now that hopefully you're enjoying a few sips of right now is what a lot of people call the Burgundy of the South. It's what people consider Grenache to be warm climate Pinot Noir. And whilst you might see that as a bit of a stretch when you're thinking about some of the Grenache that we have made in this country, I think when you try a wine like this, where you do get, where Pete was saying you're talking about pH levels that are closer to white wines than they are red, where you've got that crisp searing acid, slightly paler colour, you're heading more towards that Pinot territory than you are towards something big like Cabernet, some big tannic monster like Cabernet. So this Grenache, to me, this really is such a, I don't often say this about McLaren Vale Reds, I'll be honest, it's a very pretty wine. It's a very, very pretty wine. So Pete, I'm just going to change slides here to our next one here. This is a question that I would love to put towards you. One thing that I've always loved about Yangarra is their ability to balance the natural power that comes with existing within the McLaren Vale and making wines in a sunburnt country, in a place that gets a lot of sunshine and not a huge amount of rain. But within these wines, and I couldn't underline it more with a wine like this, that elegance and balance of finesse with power. I think you kind of hinted at it at the start by talking about the work in the vineyards is very important, but would you mind saying a few words about how your perspective on this and how you take it?
It's interesting. We're talking about, wines from around the world, and I have a great passion for Pinot Noir, Nebbiolo, and Grenache because they all have something in common, that the great examples have wonderful concentration, they have wonderful structure, but they also have this lightness on their feet. They're nearly like a ballerina, where they're incredibly strong, but they've got this amazing athleticism and finesse. But they're also varieties that just they're unyielding to over winemaking. They will showcase their place incredibly, but they also will showcase new oak. They will and they make you look silly very quickly. And that finesse is predominantly from gentle handling, and starting with grapefruit that is in its kind of natural place in terms of the ripeness level. Things like the gentle handling, the berry sorting that goes on in the winery. We're not pumping that to the fermenter, we're tipping that into the fermenter. And the very gentle, I alluded to it somewhere else, where you kind of, the maceration, the time on skins in the fermentation is really important to how softly you handle it. and the time on skins. There was an era of the Australian winemaking where we were wonderfully efficient winemakers, but we often were, especially larger corporate brands, were churning wine in and out of wineries. And, Grenache can take 21 to sometimes we make a Grenache in ceramic egg that stays on skins for as long as 150 days. So that the way that the tannins kind of come out and the gentleness of the way they come out gives you all that lovely fine. We could put that wine in a fermenter, increase the temperature, do 3 or 4 pump overs a day, and end up with a monstrosity of a wine that would be incredibly big and powerful, but it would be all arms and legs, and it wouldn't lack any of the finesse and the prettiness. And put 5% Shiraz in that Grenache to make it a little bit more concentrated. That 5% would absolutely blow out all the beautiful, pretty aromatics of the Grenache. So it shows you how much of a, I suppose, precision and fineness and gentle hand that it needs to showcase it as in its most beautiful kind of fashion.
It is that's a fantastic answer, Pete, and I have to agree so much with you. I mean, some of the wines of Priorat, they can be some of the most concentrated yet elegant wines you'll ever try in your life, and it is, as you said, Nebbiolo was the other one that you mentioned as well, where it's so easy to screw it up, but when you get it right, when you get it absolutely right, it's just absolutely heavenly. So, yeah, amazing. So I'm just going to give you guys the reminder of, because we're going to call that in a couple of minutes now. We're going to do the Wheel of Wine, and someone tonight will be winning a bottle of wine for themselves, which is great. Now, did we have any more questions, Jane, from our Facebook friends who are watching?
The only other question was a little bit answered during the first question I asked, but just one little one, I suppose. Barossa is really, really famous for Shiraz in this country, as we all know. The Barossa and the McLaren Vale, both Mediterranean climates-ish. What would you define as your sort of difference there when it comes to Shiraz between those two areas?
The thing, McLaren Vale as a whole is more coastal than the Barossa. So it has slightly more Mediterranean climate. It's, in technical speak, it's a couple of degree days cooler than the Barossa. So the wines tend to be probably, if I had to, this is very general, that you tend to get probably more bigger, powerful wines in the Barossa generally. And Shiraz is in McLaren Vale, if I use Shiraz, McLaren Vale was renowned as the sweet middle palate of Australian wines, in the fact that it has a juiciness and often a brightness as well. And it's not to say that one is either better or worse, but they really do have their very distinctive differences. And then in McLaren Vale, there's also quite distinctive differences. Where we are at Yangarra near Kangarilla is so much cooler. We're only probably 3 kilometres from the Adelaide Hills boundary. So we get much cooler nighttime temperature. And a bit like, some of the vineyards in High Eden and Eden Valley are so different to, say, something out at Grenache. And so there's a fineness and a prettiness generally of the wines that are in the coolest part of McLaren Vale. It's probably the best generic kind of answer I could give to that.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think just to add on to what you're saying there, Pete, I think you can see by the wines that are coming out of the region, the almost direct reflection of how much more of a Mediterranean climate you would classify McLaren Vale as. So you look at producers like Coriol, who are becoming quite famous for their Italian. I mean, it's an Italian family, so that makes sense. But the grape varieties are growing so prolifically well there. So Sangiovese, Fiano, I believe they have a Cortese there as well now, and then several other families around that area are finding a very, very safe home for Tempranillo. Steve Pannell is doing some fantastic work with Mediterranean varieties, so Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese varieties. And that's because of the more Mediterranean climate within that region. Whereas if you move slightly more inland and slightly further up towards the equator, it's a bit hotter, drier, as you're saying, a few more degree days longer. And that just kind of dries it out a little bit more. And you're looking at more the kind of Rhone Valley varieties that do best. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Any questions we've got there, Luke?
Yeah, no. So I guess as a kind of shameless plug, obviously we've spoken quite a bit about Rhone. If people are interested in keeping exploring Grenache and Grenache blends and Shiraz, we do have a tasting coming up in Sydney, the first one in person, but you can also, just as we're doing now, buy the kit and taste at home as well. So if you're enjoying it, we really encourage people to do that. With regards to questions, had a couple of comments come in, which is brilliant. Just jumping over to the first one from Cara. Thank you, Cara. With regards to the Grenache, Pete, do you use bush vines or?
Yes. So the original kind of planting of Grenache, I think it was often chosen because it was quite relatively high yielding, especially as young vines. As they get older, they're very low yielding. The yields on our Grenache are incredibly low, but there wasn't a lot of money around in the 40s, and for the farmers that were planting these, there wasn't endless miles and kilometres of black plastic dripper line and pumps to pump the water. And these sands in McLaren Vale were planted to Grenache because they were generally poor soils. So these were not properties that were kind of, I suppose, wealthy farmers, because these soils didn't actually grow very good crops. Some of them might have been planted to apricots. And Grenache was one of the few varieties that grew in these white sands without irrigation, and they didn't have irrigation. So, and because there probably wasn't a lot of money around that, the other choice around Grenache is you didn't need to trellis it. And what we've also learned, I suppose, over the years through our kind of ones with longer knowledge of growing these varieties in Spain and in France, is that the beauty of the bush vine is that it spreads the fruit into a three-dimensional kind of format, and it basically allows better light penetration. It also allows better airflow, so they're less likely to get mold disease in the bunches of grapes, and so consequently, over the last, I think 12 years ago, we planted a reasonable amount of more bush vine Grenache that goes into our Noir blend. So we kind of nearly doubled our Grenache plantings back then. And it's funny, those vines now are about 12 years old and are really starting to showcase some really lovely wines.
Fantastic. So were there any more questions there, Luke? Because we're getting towards our hour deadline here.
Yeah, maybe we can just have some kind of quick fire answers so we can keep to the hour. I think everyone's really enjoying it, so thank you, Peter. Just to jump on a couple, if it's okay. Peter's asked, where did Yangarra, the name, come from? So if you could just answer that, and I'll grab a second.
Sorry, I just lost what you said.
Yeah, sorry, Peter. We've had a question from Peter about the name of Yangarra, where the origin that comes from.
Yangarra, we believe, so the name of the property is Yangarra, and we believe it means, in a local dialect, from the earth. So it's kind of quite appropriate.
Fantastic. And with regards to Grenache, it seems like that's been the star of the show, and certainly coming off the text messages, the wine that's impressed most people. Just very briefly, in terms of food pairing, is there anything you'd suggest?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because Grenache, I find, is also, like a lot of medium-bodied wines, very, where, you know, people are eating, and if you're eating out, when we finally get back to eating out a lot more, that Grenache kind of has a lot of versatility. So if people are ordering lots of different dishes, I think it's one of the most versatile reds. But when you want to really nail in what it works so well with is fattier kind of foods, on oilier or fattier foods. So those meat eaters out there, the things like pork belly and lamb shoulder, because you've got all that gelatinous-y kind of fattiness, the acidity in Grenache, and it's kind of relatively finer tannins, kind of nearly act like cleanse your palate as you're kind of eating a meal. And they're my kind of favourite pairings. I think duck is a wonderful pairing with it. And then, you know, in any of those Mediterranean dishes with, you know, a lot of olive oil and things like that, I think work really well as well. Again, back to that acidity that kind of really refreshes, you know, the wine's nearly refreshing you every kind of mouthful you have.
Yeah, fantastic. And now just this is, I know from a personal perspective in my studies, I know how hard this question potentially could be. So I'm just going to answer very quickly for you. Robert's asked the question, how much extra effort goes into doing organic and biodynamic wines? I can answer very quickly, a lot. No, that's potentially a facetious answer there. So Pete, I know you've been doing it for so long now. You really are kind of what I explain you as the name. You're one of the people who put organics and biodynamics especially onto the mainstream, into the mainstream. And it's from your perspective, do you see it as a lot of extra effort for you to keep that mantra going?
With the right buy-in from all the people that work in the team. I remember when I talked to our vineyard manager, and he kind of looked at me like I'd caught some kind of disease when I said to him that this is what we were going to do. And, you know, he's bought in and he's inspired all our people. Our vineyard manager, Michael Lane, makes all that part of it happen. But it's a mindset. It doesn't necessarily have to be harder. It's a different way of thinking. It's about being, like I said, preventative versus reactive, and about preparation and planning. And once you start to kind of shift that mindset, and it's funny, in your initial kind of stages, you know, if you're used to driving around wine regions, you'll see out the very neat, sprayed out undervines of vineyards. That neatness is herbicide. And when you can kind of get your head around that, it's okay to have grasses, I like to call them herbs instead of weeds, underneath the vines, creating a natural kind of environment for the microbes that live in the soil. It isn't that bad. And like I said, it's purely mindset, and it just requires a different type of thinking. And often a lot of kind of grape growers, well, viticulturalists that are university trained are trained in a process thinking versus this preventative kind of different style of thinking. And like I said, once you get your head around it, it's actually not that hard.
Very good, very good. I imagine getting your head around it would definitely be the big challenge. But yeah, no, I really appreciate that, mate. So we're now going to go. I'm going to shoot across my screen to Luke, who's going to put on the wall of wine for everyone, and we're going to draw our winner. Hopefully, everyone's got everything in there.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. And thanks again for all your comments and questions. It's really appreciated, and we really enjoy answering them. So thanks again. As you can see, the marvelous wheel of wine is spinning. So I'm going to give it a go, and good luck to everybody.
It's a lot of names. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Glad you all want to be a part of it.
Phil, excellent. Well done.
Fantastic. Okay, so that wraps us up. Sorry, we ran a little bit over there. We got a little bit carried away with our Biodynamics chat, but that's all right. We thank everyone for coming along this evening. Peter, thank you so much for your time this evening. I know we're calling into your house, and thank you for donating an hour of this evening, and also thank you for making such fantastic wines. I know I personally am a huge fan of these wines, and I know many of our customers are as well. I think you've also garnered some new fans this evening, so thank you very much for your time.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's fun sharing kind of the detail and what goes in behind what we do, and great to be able to share that through technology. And the best part, I don't even have to be on a plane to come and do the tasting. So
it does definitely have. I mean, there's obvious disadvantages, but it does definitely have its advantages, doesn't it? Yes. So thank you everyone for coming. And we hope to see you again in another one soon. We'll be hosting these every week until otherwise until things change. So we're having a great time as well, and we hope you are too. So thank you everyone for coming. Thanks for your feedback. Congratulations to Phil, and we'll hopefully see you all soon. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Ali. Thank you, Ali. Thank you.
Cheers,
Sorry,
everyone.
Ali. Left you out of that one.
No worries. Cheers, everyone. And cheers, Pete. That was brilliant. That was really fantastic. And shame I didn't have the wines, but I will be looking them up very soon.
Yes, do.
Oh, yeah.
Do us a favour.
Thanks again, guys.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys.
Cheers, Jane. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.
Love you all.